Good afternoon. This is day 3, World War II, Second World War. Our focus question is, why did European fascists invade North Africa and the USSR? Looking at our same map as the last two times, this is a zoomed in version of those things. Last time we talked about Japan and the Pacific. This time we're moving on to Europe and Africa and Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. I already talked about how Germany had taken over Poland, Germany had taken over France, Germany had taken over Norway, and now Italy is going to try to invade Africa and connect up these two colonies into one big African empire. Then after that, they're going to go to the Balkans, and then after that, Germany is going to swing east to the Soviet Union. Question number 1. Why did European war expand to North Africa and Egypt? So the short answer is pride and resources. Mussolini here in Italy wanted to recreate the Roman Empire. So these places in red were places that Italy controlled as of the 1930s. And then into the 1940s, he and his fascist troops invaded all these places in pink. His eventual goal was to control this whole area, sort of Egypt all the way through Sudan, and then eventually up here, all of this Mediterranean area to create a new Roman Empire. Some reasons for that, obviously, were his pride and his desire to create a new Roman Empire for the Italian people. And then secondly, resources. Hitler and the Germans backed up their allies, the Italians, in North Africa. And one of the reasons was that there were resources there that were pretty useful for war. Petroleum, gas, oil reserves in North Africa would be strategically important, especially when you consider that part of the reason Germany lost World War I was that they ran out of fuel. So a seeming unlimited supply of fuel, oil, petroleum, gas, things like this would be crucial for the war effort. The other thing is the Suez Canal, which is located right here, which would enable Germany and Italy to travel easily into the Indian Ocean and over to Asia without having to go around Africa. Also, it would cut off the British. The Suez Canal was owned by the British. The British used it to get through here to get to India and back without going around Africa. The Suez Canal is a crucial supply line even today, as we saw a couple weeks ago when that giant cargo ship got stuck and it shut down shipping all around the world. It's still a crucial place for getting stuff in and out and through. And as you can see in this picture, it's pretty big. It's not a tiny little canal, although you knew that if you saw the news recently. Question number 2. Once the British were fighting the Germans and Italians in North Africa, we have to talk about strategy. The British were losing at first. The British, the Allies, at first, were losing almost all the battles. To generalize, it seemed like Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, and his German Africa Corps were like psychic. It's like they were reading the minds of the Allied planners. Every time the Allies, the British in this case, tried to set up an attack, it's like Rommel knew they were coming, and he and his troops were able to outflank the British. Turns out Rommel wasn't a strategic genius, but his some of his planners and spies had, through the Italians, broken the code that the British and the US were using to communicate about strategy. This means that he literally could read their plans in advance, and everywhere they were going to be, he already expected them, was able to go around them at great, huge looping distances in the open desert. So this code was called Military Intelligence Code number 11. Then, in 1942, when the new U.S. code was adopted and the British adopted the same new code, suddenly Rommel was much less good at guessing where the British were going to be. Another strategy that was really successful in the North African campaign was these pictures over here. So the British forces, in order to deceive German spies, after the code was switched, German spies had to use airplanes to spy from up above in the air. And the British were able to deceive those spy planes by dressing up their vehicles to look like other vehicles or to make pretend vehicles where none even existed. So this here is a tank dressed up as a truck, this like cardboard truck thing on top. And this is a regular tank, and this is an inflatable tank, and this is a cardboard tank. Different versions were used at different times, at different places, but basically these dummy brigades, part of the time organized with the 74th Armored Brigade and others at different times, these different dummy tank units were basically tasked with pretending to deploy to places where they weren't actually deploying. And if you imagine setting up a bunch of fake tanks in a location and a bunch of fake trucks in another location, but the fake trucks are actually tanks. The German spy planes fly over the top. They think, the trucks are full of infantry and the tanks are over there. And then they attack, and it's actually the reverse, or there's nothing there, or the British can remove all the inflatable tanks in the middle of the night. All of this served as a really good subterfuge, a really good strategy for misdirecting the Germans and making them spend their energy in places where there weren't actually any troops. Number 3. We're going to skip number 3. It's about the Balkans and Greece. And number 4. Predict why Hitler thought the army could successfully invade the USSR. So this is the last part of our why did the fascists think they could take over the world chunk. Why did Hitler think his army could successfully invade the USSR? Well, the USSR is mostly Russia. Napoleon famously failed to invade Russia. Russia is famously difficult to invade. So why did Hitler think he could do it? A lot of reasons. On this slide, we have a couple of those. One, you can see on this map, the Nazis and the fascists with the Italians' assistance had conquered basically all of Europe. Everywhere in the gray on this map is controlled by the fascists. Secondly, they had a lot of confidence in their blitzkrieg strategy. The blitzkrieg strategy had worked in Poland and France. It seemed like it was working in Africa, so why not? Another reason, German propaganda and honestly Hitler's true beliefs that the Slavs were Untermensch, or subhuman, meant that he believed that they were less good of people than German people, and so they would be less good at defending themselves. Part of this racist policy also meant that Lebensraum, the living space that Hitler promised in Mein Kampf and he promised to the German people, it needed to be found somewhere, and that somewhere was in this map here in Poland and in the Soviet Union. These little yellow and red dots this is literally the plans that the Nazis had for settling German people in these locations. Once these places were conquered and the people, the Untermensch, the subhuman people who were there were emptied out, either through concentration camps or deportation or just murder, then German families would be moved in there to set up wholesome German farms where German families could live and expand the German race, i.e. have a lot of babies. Lastly, you look at the statistics, Germany felt like they had an advantage. Yes, the Soviets had fewer military personnel already mobilized, but they did have some that could be in reserve. Okay, so even if they could call up all their reserves, the Soviets had more tanks than the Germans did, but the Soviet tanks were older and slower and less powerful. The Soviet Union had more military aircraft. Here we go. Military aircraft, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 aircraft. They have somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000. That's because a lot of German aircraft are busy in Africa. But here's where Germany feels like it has the advantage. Artillery and mortars, horses, motorized vehicles, and armored vehicles. These 600,000 motorized vehicles are really the place where Germany feels like it has an advantage. Motorized vehicles means blitzkrieg can go fast. If the Soviets are on foot and the Germans are in jeeps and motorcycles and trucks and armored cars, they're going to be going fast. The Soviets are going to be going slow. Also, this Untermensch idea and the blitzkrieg idea, part of this propaganda was that German soldiers were superhuman, that they were better at fighting than everyone else. Part of that came out of the propaganda after the invasion of France. However, as you probably remember, a lot of the reason for the German supposed superiority was that a lot of the German troops were hopped up on drugs like Pervitin. They weren't actually better soldiers, but Hitler and his generals some of his generals, but the German troops generally started to believe their own propaganda that they were invincible, that they were somehow super soldiers. There's I guess, 3 questions for today, because this one we're skipping. And the last question is, why did European fascists do all this? Why did the fascists invade North Africa and the USSR? Summarize that. That's all for today.